Hi, thank you for having me, Timothy. Very excited to be here. I'm an entertainment lawyer, it's true, and basically that means my job is to help people arrange their relationships in a way that is most likely to create good art. And the paradox that I'd like to share with you today is that the freest, most playful art often comes about through very specific structures that are bounded by rules and roles that may seem at first glance restrictive, but ultimately are essential for creating good art. And so I'd like to start by giving you three different propositions here. If we can move on to the, yeah. So the first is that every artistic work is a collaboration of some kind. So it's easy to imagine this if you're writing a musical and you're doing it with two friends. Somebody's writing the music, somebody's doing the lyrics, another person's writing the libretto. That's certainly a collaboration. But even if you're painting something in your closet, eventually if that's seen by anyone else, that person is going to have an experience with it. They're in essence going to collaborate with you asynchronously, but nevertheless, they'll add something to it. They'll bring something out based on their own life experience. And so the question becomes, how do we collaborate with one another, whether literal co-authors or artist to audience, artist to producer? All these different relationships come about based on the nature of the art that you're producing. The second point is that making art is dangerous. And I think making art is dangerous because making art involves exposing the deepest, truest parts of yourself, parts that are emerging, parts that are true, parts that you don't even quite know how to talk about. It also involves keying in to very distant signals that are out there that some people would say are at the heart of the universe, of the love and logic that in our tradition we believe is at the core of the universe. And one's antennae have to be particularly tuned to receive those messages. And sometimes the messages you receive are unexpected, and you may feel some hesitation about sharing what you're receiving. So it's a vulnerable place, and therefore it's dangerous to open yourself to collaboration when you're working in the arts, in contrast to perhaps other areas that you might be operating in your life. And the last part, though, is that making good art does really require freedom. Have you ever tried to write a poem when you're stressed out? It just doesn't really work. You need an ability to relax and to enjoy and to be unburdened. But how can you relax and enjoy and be unburdened if the very thing you're doing involves other people, and those other people are being invited in to the deepest, most sensitive parts of yourself, while you in turn are hopefully picking up those messages from the deepest, most sensitive, meaningful parts of the universe? And this paradox has always been a mystery to me. And every artistic collaboration that you see crash and burn is a result in one way or another of not being able to figure out one's way through this quandary. And conversely, every artistic success you've ever witnessed is because people have sorted out how to navigate those two conflicting realities. I came across a book that changed everything for me in this area. And the book is TEDxThe, and it's written by G.K. Chesterton. And as you can see, G.K. Chesterton was a friend of children. You can't tell this, but a major pipe smoker. and basically an all-around good hang who lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s in England. He was a Catholic thinker, he was a writer, he was a philosopher, and in his book Orthodoxy, he has an analogy that I found so useful. And you might find it useful too, because you, regardless if you're a student, or if you would say that you're an artist, or you're somebody who loves art, or you're somebody who's you have a friend who is an artist, I think Chesterton's analogy might be able to help you. So let me share that analogy with you. So forgive me, I'll read this if that's okay, because some of you may not be able to see it. We might fancy some children playing on the flat, grassy top of some tall island in the sea. So long as there was a wall around the cliff's edge, they could fling themselves into every frantic game and make the place the noisiest of nurseries. But the walls were knocked down, leaving the naked peril of the precipice. They did not fall over, but when their friends returned to them, they were all huddled in terror in the center of the island, and their song had ceased. So, why do I think this is such a powerful metaphor? It explained to me what I had seen, and that is, I'd seen in my professional world such fruit come from scenarios in which people knew how to relate to one another and create structures that allowed them to feel both free and safe. And so that's the question. When you're creating art or you're around people creating art, how can you make them feel free and safe? And so I think good boundaries and collaboration make everyone feel safe, and that feeling of security provides the artistic freedom. So the question becomes, and this idea of this wall, right? The wall that goes around the island. I'm going to use that as that's our metaphor for roles and rules that allow people to know, I can say this thing, I can take this risk without falling off the cliff into the rocks of rejection, humiliation, shame, all the things people are scared about, rightly, frankly, when they're creating something that's new in the arts world. And so I think that one has to ask oneself, okay, what's a good wall? A good wall is a wall that just isn't a wall for the sake of being a wall, but it's something that actually allows people to play. What's an arrangement that will allow somebody to be really free, okay? Secondly, you need to look at the form of art you're working in, because each form of art has developed its own custom about who does what and sort of what the rules are. And those are actually generated by a lot of experience, people understanding, hey, the best result comes from this person doing X and not Y. So for instance, I often work in the theater quite a bit. The playwright's job is to write the play. The producer's job is to handle everything necessary to mount the play. If people start doing one and not the other, if they swap roles or they're confused about who's supposed to be doing what, you're definitely going to get a bad play. So let me give a couple case studies really briefly about scenarios here. So these are examples where people have come up with a good wall. So the first example I want to give you is the case of Manny Eisenberg and Tom Stoppard. Manny Eisenberg is on the top there. He's a legendary Broadway producer, produced maybe 75 or so shows over his career. Tom Stoppard, looking very mysterious and English there on the bottom, is unquestionably one of the top 3 or 4 greatest playwrights of the 20th century. And again, I'm going to read this quote from Manny that relates to when Manny, as the producer, was working with Tom Stoppard as the playwright on a new play called The Real Thing in the early 80s. Manny says, when we did The Real Thing, the Tom Stoppard play, which is a first-class play, we were all terrified that Tom would ask our opinion, because then you'd actually have to have one. None of this, well, the second act needs work, or all those other banalities. So what's happening there? Manny feels vulnerable. He's huddled in the middle of the island. Why? Because he may be asked to opine in a way that he doesn't have the security that what he's going to say is going to be acceptable or okay. He's worried he's going to fall off the edge of the cliff. So what does he do? He doesn't want to say anything. But he stumbles upon a good boundary. And let me read that. So I'm sitting in the back of the theater in Boston, and there was a tap on my shoulder, and there he was, Tom Stoppard. What do you think? And so I sort of blurted out, 10 minutes into the second act, I wasn't paying attention. And he nodded his head and said, maybe you're right. And 5 days later, he came back and said, is it better? He goes on. So perhaps what a producer should really do is tell the author at what points the play he's not engaged. Don't tell the author how to write it, because you can't intrude on the lunacy of that process. But nevertheless, producers do go around anyway and tell them, fix this, do that, and that's a mistake. Most authors are intuitive. They don't know what the heck you're talking about, and they'll be defensive. They're going to waste 30% of their energy defending against your criticism, and you don't really know what you're suggesting works anyway. Manny found a wall. The wall was, I'm not going to say anything more than what my intuitive gut reaction, where my attention is going. He didn't say, you need to change the characters so that they're more likable. He didn't say, this line doesn't work, you should rewrite it this way. He simply was able to share his intuitive gut about when his attention waned and when it was engaged. That's a wall. And in building that wall, he now is able to be free. He can freely collaborate with Stoppard in saying, I was totally engaged there, you lost me a little bit here. Similarly, Stoppard, do you think Stoppard wants Manny Eisenberg, as brilliant as Manny is, to give him like line notes? No. Stoppard wants to create his own safe space in which he can be free, but in order to do that, he needs assurance, feedback, and a reality check from somebody who's responding to the work. And so Tom Stoppard and Manny Eisenberg found a beautiful boundary for themselves in their relationship, and they went on to produce like a half dozen of their shows. Manny produced like a half dozen of the shows of Tom Stoppard's. They're actually having dinner tonight in London. Manny is in his 90s, Tom Stoppard's in his 80s. So the other beautiful thing about being attentive to these arrangements in the arts and collaboration is it sets you up for long relationships in the arts, which is really the secret sauce of the whole thing. Secondly, really quick, Steve Jobs. This is a different scenario. So a different scenario requires a different wall. A different art form requires a different wall. Steve Jobs, in the 80s, absolutely is an artist. He was doing something that nobody had ever done before. He was bringing the artistry of industrial design to personal computing, to make not just something functional, but make it beautiful. And here's what he said. Some people say, give the customers what they want, but that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. I think Henry Ford once said, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me, a faster horse. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. That's why I never rely on market research. Our task is to read things that are not yet on the page. So, if you are doing art that has no precedent whatsoever. You're not writing a play that's going to be on a stage that people are going to come see. You're doing something completely wild, different. It may be necessary for your wall to be almost absolute in the way that Steve Jobs demanded that there not be any feedback. Why? Because his wall, in order to create a playful environment for himself and the people that he was working with, he couldn't be corrupted by the consumer voices of the time saying, we don't really need that, or it's too expensive, or whatever. He needed pure isolation from those sorts of conflicting voices. That's a wall. He built it. It worked. Maybe it worked a little too well, but so you have to consider what you're doing in the arts, what form, and you take into account all those things in building a wise wall. Finally, case study 3, you. As I said before, everybody in here, whether you're a student, a parent, you would call yourself an artist, you are going to be called on to collaborate. You are going to be called on to be involved in the arts in one way or another. And my charge to you today is the next time that somebody says, hey, I just wrote this short story, do you want to read it? Or I'd like to try out a monologue for you. take a moment and think about what is going to put them in the best position to be free and to be safe. And if they're safe, they'll be free. So thank you so much for having me.